Welcome to the Black Girls Heal podcast, where we talk about changing unavailable relationship patterns, healing unresolved trauma, and building a healthy relationship with first you and then others. Every episode, we will talk about actionable advice that you can apply today to break unhealthy patterns and grow your self-worth. I'm Sheena Tubbs. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Black Girls Heal. So I have a special treat for you this week. This week we're talking about avoidance, love avoidance, intimacy avoidance, avoidant attachment styles. And we're digging into ways that those of us who have that attachment style or disposition can make our lives better, make our relationships better. And these are all relationships, not just romantic. Because those of us who struggle with avoidant attachment styles and ways of seeing the world and interacting, all of our relationships are affected because of the walls we put up, because of the false intimacy, because of the mask, because of our avoidance techniques and distancing from people and leaving before it gets too close. So I'm going to give you 3 ways that you can implement some changes now today. But before we start, the special treat is I was thinking about how I was going to do this episode. And I was thinking, should I recap what avoidance is by itself? And then I realized one of the most popular episodes that I had back when I was doing Love Junkie was the love avoidance episodes. And it was split into 2 parts. So the first half was like 30 or 40 minutes about what is love avoidance, how does it look in our relationships, and it was just really great and it was really deep. And I had a guest interview with Lisa Palick, who is an awesome therapist in California, and she works at the Center for Healthy Sex in Los Angeles, and they do special intensives and things. And she was kind enough to be on the podcast, and she did an amazing job. And so it was 2 parts. The first part was like an introduction about what this looks like in our relationships. How does it look like to be a couple? If one person is a love addict and the other one is a love avoidant, is recovery possible? The answer is yes. And then the second half was all about the things that you can do. And so I was thinking, let's just pull from those episodes since they were the most popular, and I'm going to let someone who is an expert tell you herself. And so the beginning part of this podcast is going to be with Lisa introducing herself, telling us about what it may look like in our relationships. Now, I know that I've talked about it before in other podcast episodes. I know that I've kind of had different sprinklings of what the interaction cycles for us looks like. However, when I was re-listening to it to think about which parts to keep, because there was a lot of information, there are a lot of gems that I've not mentioned yet about what it may look like in our relationship. So I really encourage you to take a listen and to not fast forward until you hear my voice again, giving you those 3 tips. And also, even if it's not new information per se, what I have learned is that sometimes we need to hear and learn about things multiple times for it to sink in. There's a difference between something going to our head than to our heart, which is why sometimes we can struggle with changing our lives and changing and healing, even though we can tell someone, this is what I know I'm supposed to do, or this is what I know I'm supposed to think about myself, or this is what I know I'm supposed to feel, but it's the farthest thing from what is actually true for you. You get what I'm saying? And so that's why sometimes we need the repetition for it to sink in and to take root. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the intro. Lisa, like I said, will introduce herself. And then you are going to hear me come on and talk about the 3 things that you can do. Before we do that, though, I have a little something special going on. So some of you may know about something called a cross addiction. And what a cross addiction is whenever we can interchange different activities and behaviors or substances within each other to help us self-soothe and self-medicate. And so sometimes the classic cross addictions are things that we hear about, like hard drugs or pills, cocaine, weed, alcohol, cigarettes, ecstasy, all those things. And so people will go back and forth between different substances to get their high, to kind of chill out with one, pick up another one. And so that's kind of the classic way that we can talk about cross addictions. But you can also use other activities or behaviors and things to also self soothe and self medicate. And if you feel like it is impacting your functioning, that you're struggling with your impulses, the ability to say no to it, that is taking over and impacting your life in a negative way, and you still continue to use and do it to excess in spite of the consequences, you could consider that an addiction. And so, different types of things that people, when it comes to intimacy disorders, may call addictions or food. And so, this is not, I'm not talking about eating disorders per se, even though for some people they do have an eating disorder in the actual classic definition of the word, like bulimia or anorexia. But it could also be problematic eating, so stress eating, emotional eating, shopping, overdebting, gambling, zoning out through internet devices, internet and devices and screens, sex, whatever your makeup is, it is different for everyone who feels like they may ascribe to what I'm saying right now. However, the reason why this is a special announcement before we get into the episode is when it comes to the women that I help through our signature program, Learn to Thrive, and also through in my private practice where I help women with love addiction and also as a coach, there are three things that I tend to see women interchange the most often. And so women will go between using relationships and love, or sometimes sex, sex to get love, or sex as a form of power and control. They may use food, and or they may use money. And so Learn to Thrive already takes care of the relationships and all of that. But when it comes to money, this is the one that I feel like so many people, or that many of us, we kind of don't know that there are more steps that we can take. And so thank God there is more and more financial literature and information out there for us to get our money right. And they're all over Instagram as well. They're very accessible for those of us who like that platform. So I'm thinking of people like The Budgetnista, Journey to Launch, My Fab Finance, Hey Berna. Like there's so many women and women of color out there killing it, helping us get our money right and teaching us information about budgets and credit and all of those things. However, for some of us, it does not matter how good our budget is, how many promises we make to ourselves, the fact that we have no money in the bank. We are still going to buy the shoes. We're still going to sign up for this trip. We're still going to go without the things that we need because we're afraid of losing the money. And that's because our mindset and our emotions around money are wrapped up in old wounds, right? So the same kind of concept of our relationships are affected based on old wounds that have happened in the past, the stories that we've learned about what relationships mean, about what friendship means, about what love means, impacts us as adults unless we unlearn it. The same thing happens with money. And so with money, it's not always, sometimes it is, but it's not always just a logic and a mind issue. It's not always just about self-control and willpower. Sometimes it's about the underlying pain that's underneath us making these impulsive decisions, or us going into avoidant behaviors and aversion behaviors with money that we need to heal. And so avoidant behaviors with money would be like money hoarding. And so no matter how much money we get, we never feel safe and satisfied. And so this is more than just, it can be this, but it's more than just, you're constantly climbing the ladder, trying to get a certain income amount, but it's never enough to help you feel safe. It could also just be that you're working a maybe even a minimum wage job. You have a huge amount of money in your bank account, but you're kind of living in deprivation and you're living way below your means because you're afraid of using money on things that are actually important. And so maybe you'll be wearing clothes that don't fit you anymore, or going without turning on your lights, even though you have plenty of money for your light bill, but you don't want it to be too high. And basically, you're not taking care of yourself because of this fear around money. Some of us have aversion to having money and wealth, and so as soon as we get money, it goes right out of our hands. So either we might give it away, or we may spend it, or whatever, we may lose it, whatever it may be. But there's something in us, an unsaid belief that we are not good enough to have the money, or it's wrong for us to have it. Some of us are codependent givers. And so it's not even that we spend money on ourselves, but if there's someone around us that needs something, we are the first ones to offer it, or we can't say no. And so we find ourselves giving tens or hundreds or thousands of dollars to people who maybe they appreciate it, maybe they don't. But either way, it affects us financially. That we are constantly trying to save and rescue other people, and we lack boundaries. And anytime we try to say no to them or to ourselves, we're filled with shame and we're filled with guilt. So with all of that said, because I know that this is the same issue and kind of the same mechanism as what happens with our relationships, I am creating a spending and debting money rehab course to help us overcome this. This is going to be separate from Learn to Thrive. It's going to use pretty much the same method that I teach there, with some variations as I've kind of like tried and tested it out on my own. But I'm taking a beta class of women who would be interested in testing out this program for me and with me. You would get private coaching. Everyone would get their own private one-on-one sessions with me as well, because I really want to make sure that, one, that this actually works, and then also two, that that is the best that it can be, and so to be able to get as much feedback as possible. So any woman who's listening right now who has been having persistent money issues over your lifetime, you have tried everything that you know how to do to work through it, and somehow you still keep getting in the way. Maybe you have been struggling with some shame around it. Like, why can't I just do this the right way? I make too much money to be broke, kind of thing. All those thoughts, all those feelings. I would love for you to join me in the program. The program will not be free because, you need to invest in yourself, and you are going to be getting some really good support and information. However, it will be affordable, as well as this is the beta launch. And then depending on the feedback and all of that, it will be released again sometime next year. So if you are interested in joining the waitlist, I would love for you to sign up by going to the link in the show notes. You can also go to blackgirlsheal.org/money-rehab and sign up there, and you'll get information and when the doors open to sign up. So that is that. Hopefully that is of interest to the Black Girls Heal community. If it is not of interest, then we won't do the course, which is perfectly fine, and we'll stick with the focus on relationships only. But seeing how this is so common, and literally when a woman that I work with will break up, she will tell me how her money is looking funny, or she'll spend all this time over focusing on getting her finances right, and then when she gets in a relationship, it goes sideways. Or just the woman is constantly living in deprivation and doesn't really take care of herself. Doesn't know how to take care of herself. She knows that there's something off, but she can't really figure out what it is. That's what this is about. It's about getting our hearts right, our minds right, so that all of our financial plans, about investments, about budgets, about retirement, about being millionaires, whatever your goal is, that you will achieve it, and also that you will feel the freedom to dream. Because some of us listening do not have any dreams around money because we feel like that's bad. And so let's get healed in that area as well. So Without further ado, let's get into this episode. All right, so we are here for another episode of Love Junkie, and I am so excited to have Lisa Palick with us today. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Sheena. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We are talking about love avoidance, which I know is a much requested topic. A lot of people wondering what it might look like for them and how they can break free. And so I'm excited to have you come and talk about it. And so, but before we get started, I was wondering if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So my name is Lisa Palick. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist based in Los Angeles, California. My specialty is sexuality and sex therapy, intimacy, relationships, and also love addiction. I have a private practice in West LA, and I'm also a clinician at the Center for Healthy Sex, where I developed the 3-day Women's Love Addiction workshop. I have one coming up this weekend, in fact. I'm also a facilitator of a women's intimacy group that happens every Thursday evening. And I have been doing this work for about 30 years. I've been a sex educator and working on really all aspects of sexuality for many years, encouraging people to really experience their sexual potential in a variety of ways.
Great. You are the perfect person. Let's go ahead and just jump right in. So, what is love avoidance and how might it be different than love addiction?
Well, I think that love avoidance historically has been a subcategory of love addiction. People who recognize that they have unhealthy relationship patterns often think, am I a love addict? Because that's the popular term. I think it's become much more visible in today's culture. There's a lot of, writing about and even television shows talking about love addiction. So people feel like they can't connect. They're not having healthy relationships. They usually suspect love addiction, but they feel like I'm not really the clingy, needy person. I'm the person who tends to back away or often feels like a better than or has trouble getting into relationship. So I would say love avoidant is part of a continuum of unhealthy relationship dynamics where you might have love addiction on one end and love avoidance on the other end. I think it's been given short shrift in a lot of the literature and books, and even therapeutic interventions, particularly for women. I think traditionally love avoidance has fallen along gender lines. So typically in our culture, we tend to view men as the ones who are emotionally unavailable, right? That's the other kind of catchphrase for love avoidance. And women as being clingy, needy, love addicted, always chasing after the emotionally unavailable partner. But clearly, that's not true. And that any person of any gender can feel avoidant and certainly can move from more clingy, needy, wanting to be addicted to someone else, and then sliding back along that scale of pulling away, fear of being engulfed, wanting to back off, putting up a wall, avoidance, often in the same relationship. So I think we need to look at love addiction and love avoidance really as somewhat of a sliding scale, not so much two halves of a coin, but really there's a lot of gray area in between, and people really slide back and forth, I think, between those two poles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, a question I often get is, can someone be a love avoidant and a love addict? And basically what you're saying is, yes, there's a lot of overlap, and they, like you said, there are two sides of the same coin. They work together.
Exactly. So, and many people tend to have traits of both. I would say the three defining traits of love avoidance are that they evade intimacy in any relationship, primarily a romantic relationship, by creating a lot of intensity outside of it. So these are people who tend to be very busy, driven, successful, busy with school, busy with work, often have a lot of interests outside of a relationship, a romantic relationship. That's what really fuels them. So I would say that's one of the main characteristics of a love avoidant. And then the second one would be that they avoid being known in the relationship. There's lots of details about themselves that they don't share, things this is unconscious, right? They may think that they're sharing things about themselves, but there's often some walls up. And they also use a lot of distancing techniques to avoid intimate contact with their partners. And that would be the third thing. So, and these are three characteristics that, Pia Mellody in her book, Facing Love Addiction, where she has a section on love avoidance. These are the three main things that she has identified, and I also find to be true in working with women who initially come in for love addiction or some kind of intimacy problem, or, they're just not getting the love that they want, only to find out, love avoidance, that really sticks with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so hard because these are the messages that we're taught to live by, what it means to have a successful life, so we're praised, when we're able to be ambitious and, go-getter and a leader and have all these friends and all these activities, right? And so we think we're healthy when really we're creating so much blockage to being able to be available to someone. It's confusing, how much is too much, and when do I pull back, and when does it mean that I'm actually giving away part of myself to be in a relationship? How do I know the balance?
Exactly. And I think that's always been tricky, particularly for women. There's that motto of, I can have it all as a woman because of, the history of we raise the children, right? We bear the children. That's biological part of being female. And so it's really difficult to balance, the needs of children, the needs of relationship with being an independent modern woman, of course. I think when it comes to love avoidance, though, we need to look at going back to our own families and family of origin, because as you know, Sheena, this is where it all starts. And so for women and people who have traits of love avoidance, if they look back into their own families, they'll often feel that as children they were parentified. They felt really drained by the relationship. They felt that the parent often looked to them, right, as what we might call higher power in program language. Parent really looking to the child, the nurtured, taken care of. Parent needs the child in an unhealthy way, because healthy bonding, right, is the parent is really there for the child. The parent is really organized around the child's needs. And instead, with people who, as adults, find themselves avoiding intimacy, it's often because they were just completely enmeshed as a child. They didn't know where they stopped and their parent began. And it felt yucky, and they felt suffocated, and they want to back away from that. They feel like, children who were enmeshed and engulfed and really controlled by other people often find themselves ending up in avoidant relationships. They find themselves being the avoidant one. They want to back away from that. And it's a double bind, because love avoidance, there's also the love part. They also are longing to be in connection with someone else. Unlike some people who just maybe can't relate to other people, want to be alone, are introverted, or maybe have some other kind of psychiatric condition where they just don't want to connect. That's not true of love avoidance. Love avoidants want to be in relationship and they long for connection, but they're so afraid of being lost in that relationship and ultimately abandoned. That they want to do it in a very protected way so that they can control that. So they long for intimacy, but are also underneath it all just terrified of being abandoned, because that's what happened. You know, when they had to care for a parent or be the smart one or make the decisions or kind of be the boss of the family in some way, they lost themselves and their needs weren't met. And their child self was really abandoned. So that's the deep pain for love avoidance, is this don't leave me. And so maybe I'll leave you first in order to protect myself. But every time I do that, I don't get the love I want. And so that hurts so much as well. So that's the cycle.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you, I'm tapping into my inner avoidant and just kind of checking to see what she can relate to, that part of me. And I'm thinking how when I'm like deep in that, some of the stuff that you shared, it is so true, but because my walls are so up, I don't really connect to it. So that fear of being abandoned, like the go-to thought for an avoidance is actually, I don't really need anybody. And I'm the gifted, that better than, like, that I'm in control. And, you know, it's so insidious. And so I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, like what that better than, and that like independent spirit, like what that might feel like for folks.
Right. Well, Sheena, you just brought up an excellent point that avoidants often have walls up instead of healthy boundaries. So healthy boundary would be like, I can see what you're saying and here's how I feel. And maybe there's a more awareness of what I'm really doing and how I'm really feeling, what my thoughts, my actions, my emotions are. And when we have walls up, it's a form of denial. We don't know what we don't know. So we might feel exactly like, well, I don't need anybody and I don't see the problem and I am angry and I am a really calm person. You know, you could alternate between those two things, right? I'm always pleasant. Nothing ever rattles me, or just like people never get it right. And I'm always irritated with them. You know, there's a spectrum there that people can go back and forth between. So it shows up in different ways because we're all really unique, right? Unique as a fingerprint. So even though here's a template for love avoidance, you know, when people are listening to this podcast, you have to remember it's just a template. And for every single person, there's going to be a unique display of how avoidance shows up in a relationship. So I think that's exactly what you said. On one level, I feel the whole sadness and despair around not being in a relationship. And yet at other times I can feel like I don't really need anybody. So that's a way for people to identify, oh, maybe there's something happening outside of my awareness. Another way to put it would be unconsciously that I've built these walls that I don't let people in. I just think, well, this is just the way I am. And when you get into doing some personal work or therapy around this, you can realize, aha, that's a wall. So wall can show up as giving people the silent treatment, not really talking very much. A wall can show up as a wall of words. I'm always talking. I never stop talking. It's a way for me to not let people know who I am. When someone asks me about myself, I want to say, hey, I'm good. How about you? And I deflect the conversation. It's all about them and what's going on for them. That's another way. That's kind of a flashing yellow light that maybe you have a wall up and maybe you're experiencing some avoidance in this relationship. Is that helpful?
Oh, that is so helpful. That's so great. And especially that last part about that kind of like turning the question back around on other people being a sign of avoidance. I think about the caretakers and those of us who are codependent and enablers and how it's so easy to focus on other people. And so when it comes to love addiction and love avoidance, there's a lot of confusion because it's like, well, I'm always taking care of people and I'm so open and I'm so like available, but it's you're not being vulnerable with yourself. Like the attention is always on other people and taking care of them, and no one actually gets to know you because you're the martyr, because you're the mom of the group of whatever it might be as.
Yes, absolutely. Avoidance can often take that victim position, as can love addicts, right? I mean, anyone can really take that position for a variety of reasons. I would say that, taking care of needy people is, again, a classic trait of love avoidance. That taking care of needy people makes me feel good about myself. That's how I feel worthy, because, again, often unconsciously, I'm not good enough, right? I'm not really worth loving. I feel this concept of this belief, I'll call it, right? This core belief of I'm just not good enough shows up in people struggling with unhealthy relationship patterns. And I would say in general, it's probably the number one core belief that shows up for people who come to therapy, whether they're struggling with addiction, depression, anxiety, relationship issues. That core belief of I'm just not worth anything shows up over and over again. And even for love avoidance, who on the outside may appear very super independent, often very educated, smart, driven, successful, on the inside often feel like, how come I can never make relationships work? What's wrong with me? How am I broken? Never good enough. And that feeling of I never get what I need is very familiar to them. Kelly McDaniel, in her book Ready to Heal, say for love avoidance, their core belief is that loss is inevitable. No matter what I do, right? People are going to abandon me in some way. I'm never going to get what I need. And so they often find themselves in relationships where, again, unconsciously, they're repeating that pattern. Because unconsciously, we often pick people, and some people would say we always pick people, where unconsciously we're just going to repeat old relationship patterns in it because it feels familiar, because we want to try to get a different outcome, because that's where our brains are wired, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. So good. And it's so true. Are there any other ways, I know we've talked about a lot, but are there any other ways that love avoidance might show up in ways that we don't expect?
Well, I would say these are the ways these are sort of the flashing signs, the yellow lights, right? That signal to me that someone might be struggling with avoidance, love avoidance. And I work primarily with women, although I do also work with men, but women make up the bulk of my practice. So I would say that women who tend to pick fixer-uppers, like I met this person and I could really see their potential, right? But they have to do this, this, and that, and then I'm going to be happy. They might say on some level, this person is not their equal. They don't make enough money. They're not smart enough. Maybe on some level, they're kind of a loser. They don't have it together. But there's something about it that's also that there's an intensity there. And that could be that maybe the sexual chemistry is good, or they find this person physically attractive, or they're funny. There's something that happens there to kind of connect, right? There has to be some level of connection. But I think love avoidants tend to pick fixer-uppers. I think that's a marker. I think very quickly love avoidance will go into being highly critical of their partner, picking that person apart, noticing their flaws, really questioning whether or not they should be in this relationship. A lot of times this is often really very visceral too. It's something that they really feel in their body. They might feel a physical, almost like repulsion about this person. Like, I can't stand to be around this person. They're driving me crazy. And yet, when that person starts to move a little too far away, there's an internal panic and like, I have to bring this person back. And that's the like, don't leave me piece of it. Like, I don't want to be too close to you, but I also don't want you to go. That's the double bind. I would say that the other thing about love avoidance is that they often come on really strong.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, love avoidance, right, while they're seeking that intensity, they are seeking that connection. So they might come on really strong in terms of, oh, let's see, they might have a really fancy job. They might have a lot of money. They might, take you on some fancy trip. They might do some things to really wow and seduce you and really suck you in at the beginning of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's often but then as the relationship progresses, that might start to fade. And then it might lead to arguments, getting critical, backing away, getting really busy with other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you're saying that example, I think more of kind of stereotypical male, female, heterosexual relationship. Does it look differently if it's the woman who's the avoidant in the relationship? Does the seduction look the same as far as like the, taking them away on trips and all that other stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I think it can be any sort of relationship. I mean, I absolutely don't want to portray this in a heteronormative kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it in, same-sex couples. I've seen it in opposite-sex couples, however people identify in terms of along, sexual and gender lines. This dynamic can still be at play because we have to look at, going back to the family, how did this person learn to be in relationships? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Did they learn that relationships felt safe and secure and I got my needs met? No. People who struggle with unhealthy relationship dynamics, whether they identify as love avoidant, love addicted, codependent, to me, it doesn't really matter, those labels. I think they're useful for people as a way to get a handle on, this is problematic and something can be done about it. I think there's a lot of crossover and blurred lines there between, love, addiction, and avoidance and codependence. And you really just have to look at how are these symptoms showing up in your own life and what do you want to do about them? And so in all cases, people there's fear of intimacy and fear of abandonment. I would say those are the two primary driving factors. And for a love addict, on the surface, it's don't leave me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in fantasy about you. You're my perfect person. Oh, I've built this whole life for us. We're going to be partnered forever. I'm in it, right? That's the whole don't leave me. But underneath it, for people who have traits of love addiction, there's also the fear of abandonment, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the fear of intimacy. Let me correct that. For love addicts, on the surface, it's don't leave me, I need you, don't go. But underneath it, there's also this fear of intimacy because you're living in a fantasy about this other person. You're not really seeing who they are. You're not really seeing yourself, right? So love avoidance, with love avoidance, it's flip-flopped. On the surface, it appears, I don't want to get too close. I have a fear of intimacy, but underneath it, I also don't want you to leave me. So fear of intimacy, fear of abandonment, for people on that continuum of love addiction, love avoidance, they're both present, but in different degrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to answer your question, yes, love addiction, love avoidance, this relational pattern can show up regardless of gender or sexual preference. Absolutely. For example, at Center for Healthy Sex, we do a lot of sex addiction intensives for men. And oftentimes these men, generally heterosexual, but not always, come in with sex addiction. So they're acting out a lot sexually in terms of prostitutes, pornography, double lives, with multiple affairs, cheating, that sort of thing. But they realize going through our program, underneath it, there's this love addiction, love avoidance piece that really resonates with them. And they think, that's the part I didn't even realize. Like I thought it was just all having to do with my sexual behaviors, but really there's this whole relational piece that I didn't even see. And so I find that very common. And that even in, when we're talking about love addiction and love avoidance, there's no denying the sexual piece and where that fits in. Either people can be more compulsive around sexuality or more anorexic around their sexuality. There's always that piece as well mixed in. But usually it's the relational piece is the front and center, and then the sexual behavior is secondary with, love addiction and love avoidance, I find.
Yeah, it's just how it plays out, for sure.
Exactly.
So when you talked about how it doesn't matter what you call it, and I'm of course heavily paraphrasing, but it doesn't matter what you call it, but it's about intimacy and connection. I totally align and relate to that, which is why, on this podcast, especially last few episodes, at the date that I'm recording this, I have stayed away from calling it love addiction and love avoidance. I'll call it an intimacy disorder first, and I'll talk about vulnerability, and I'll talk about it in more general terms, because I think people get so caught up in the categories versus the fact that I'm hiding from connecting to other people, and I have difficulty being honest with myself and like being in a relationship with myself, and it's affecting all these different parts of my life, and if I can just get to the root cause, which is about like I said, intimacy, then I can actually move forward.
Exactly. And I often struggle with the term love addiction, because people say, well, how can I be addicted to love? Love is supposed to be the ultimate healer, right? Love heals all. Love is what makes us whole and connected and fills us with vitality and purpose. And love is all there is, essentially. So how can I be addicted to something that's supposed to be so good for me? So I do have trouble myself with that term love addiction. And I also use it as a shorthand, because I think in today's culture, and particularly in Los Angeles, there are a lot of people, if you say that phrase, love addiction, they go, okay, I know what you're talking about. Whereas if you say intimacy disorder or something more complicated or a more descriptive sentence, I just use it as a shorthand, I guess, to get people's attention, and then I, in some ways, disregard it. I suppose. But I do feel, and people do ask me that question all the time. I don't want to identify as a love addict. So why do you use that term? That would be the question. Why do you use that term, love addiction? I find it offensive. I find it. I just reject it. It doesn't resonate with me. I don't want to identify that way. And I will say that the reason I think I still use it, and that, many women before me have used it, there's been many books written by female authors on love addiction, is that if you look at these unhealthy relationship patterns through the model of addiction, then you can also see that there's a treatment for it. That it's not just how women are, or you're broken, or, well, this is just how relationships work, or you haven't met the right person. That's a big piece. I think so many therapists and counselors and coaches miss that. They think, oh, you've just picked the wrong person. You just need to find the right person, and everything's going to be okay. And they completely dismiss and even miss the underlying pattern. So I think when you use an addiction model, you can say, well, here's what's going on, and then here's the way to repair that, and here's the way to really heal yourself. So for many people, that makes sense, and that clicks, and they want to do 12 steps, and they want to go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and they want to work that kind of program. And so for many people, that works. And for many people, not as much.
Yeah, we just have to figure out what works for us, for sure. And I find myself on this platform trying to catch everybody because I just want to make sure that people get to the other side of the healing, no matter what you call it or don't call it, that you take what you need and you leave the rest, right? So
I am in complete agreement with you, Sheena. I'm in complete agreement with you.
Okay, so wasn't Lisa wonderful? And so let's talk about the 3 things that you can do to make your life better if you struggle with avoidant behaviors. The first thing that I want you to do is to make I don't care your new trigger phrase. So anytime you say the words I don't care, I want you to change the meaning to maybe being kind of saying that with pride, because most of the time when I see people use that phrase, I don't care, it's almost like you can't touch me, you can't hurt me, you can't get to me. That's kind of the underlying meaning, or that's exactly what they mean, and they'll say those words afterwards. But that's actually a sign of you shutting down. That's actually a sign of you not being in touch with yourself, which makes it hard or difficult or impossible for other people to be in touch with you. And so anytime you say, I don't care, even though it's protective, even though it makes you feel safe, even though I'm sure it makes you feel strong, I want you to pause. I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to stop and think, okay, what do I actually feel? If you actually feel numb or neutral, I want you to be curious about, so why is it that I don't care? Usually when people use the phrase I don't care, they're in a conversation that is emotionally charged. So maybe you or the other person is upset about something that happened, something that could happen, something that one of you may be afraid could happen, whatever it may be. And I don't care is the response to say that I am not involved, I'm not affected by it. And if that's the case, if you're having a conversation where one or both parties, or multiple parties, depending on who's around, is emotionally charged and everyone's having a reaction but you, I want you to kind of think about why that is. And if any feelings about ego and pride about, well, that's because they're oversensitive and they're not in control of themselves and X, Y, and Z come up, I want you to be curious about that. And just think, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe that is the case. Maybe you are around people who are overly sensitive in your opinion or in your experience. And I want you to kind of think, well, is there any place that I am sensitive? Is there any place that I do show emotions? And if you cannot think of a place, I want you to maybe consider that there's something different that you can be doing. Maybe it's actually healthier that you do care in some situations versus you don't care in all situations. And if that's the case, in whatever circumstance that you feel most comfortable with, I want you to pause and think, okay, if I did care about what was going on, what would I feel? And see if that helps shift some things around. And once you're in touch with your emotions, then you would be able to express to other people what you need, what happened that made you feel that way, and how they can change it or how things can shift for you to feel safe in the future instead of you shutting down. Because what I don't care does is it pushes people away. It literally tells them that you don't care, which makes them not want to get close to you. And it may be convenient in the moment. However, that's a pattern that you cannot shut off. That's saying that you are uninvested in what's happening and you want to have relationships, I'm assuming, which is why you're still listening to this podcast episode right now. So, second thing I want you to do is I want you to notice how much time you're spending away from your relationships. And this is all your relationships: family, friends, romantic partners, your children, and use numbers. Literally look at your schedule, say, okay, I spent this much time at my desk, I spent this much time in the office. When I was home, I had my laptop in front of me, I was looking at my phone, I'm checking emails, which means that your body was there but you weren't physically present. I want you to write all that down. And maybe just keep track of it for a couple days. You can do it for a week if you're an overachiever, but just do it for a couple days. And see how many hours of your day that you are actually present with the people around you. Okay? So category for work, category for your hobbies and activities, category for TV, that you're just watching your movie. I just want you to notice how much time do you spend having conversation with them? How much time do you spend looking them in their eyes? How much time do you spend asking them about their day and then listening to their whole response instead of cutting them off and saying that you're over the conversation or making an excuse to leave? How often does that happen? And if the numbers are lower than you would want them to be, or in a way that doesn't seem healthy to you. So basically, you spend out of 48 hours, you spent 40 hours or 42 hours doing something else, and you only spent 2 hours with your people, and that is a problem to you, which hint, it should be a problem to you. I want you to think about adjusting that. Here's the thing about avoidance: we are very, very good at always finding something to do that will keep us away from being close and intimate to somebody else. There is always going to be a project, there's always going to be a trip, there's always going to be a charity event, there's always going to be something, there's always going to be a dinner that you have to prepare because no one's eaten for the whole day, and so you have to do it right now, and then by the time you're done everybody's asleep. Like, there's always going to be some excuse. And so with that being the case, your perspective and your mindset has to change to where you value your relationships and time with people more. And so I want you to start to think, if I were to pass away tomorrow, or if this person were to pass away tomorrow, would I be happy that I sent this last email, or would I be upset, and would I regret it, and would I be sad? And that's kind of where we have to go, because tomorrow is not promised, nor is time. Things change rapidly, and we need to enjoy and connect and be close to the people that we love while we have them. The third thing I want you to do is I want you to start practicing mindfulness and meditation. So avoidance, this kind of links back to the first one about the I don't care and noticing your feelings. Sometimes, not all the time, but I want to say maybe more often than not, we really feel like we're okay. Like, we really feel like we're calm about the situation. We're truly not upset. We're truly just chilling, and it's really not that big of a deal. Which maybe that's true in the case. But what mindfulness and meditation does is it gets you grounded in your body. It gets you at a place where you can just sit and not have to have all the busyness that we do as avoidants around us to cope. We're constantly doing something. There is not someone who's avoidant who does not spend time actively shutting off their body and distracting their attention to something else. And that's even for those of us who are introverts who isolate. Like, we're not just sitting there looking at the wall. We are watching Netflix. We are on IG. We're doing something versus being passive. And so what mindfulness and meditation does is it gets you quiet. It gets you still to where all of that frenzy and all that stuff that you're secretly running from, that you're not quite aware that you are, until you stop to listen, it starts to come up. And when you do that enough and you build a practice, you start to feel more comfortable instead of always needing to run. When you're able to finally get 5 minutes through meditation, then sooner or later you'll be able to start to get through 10 minutes. And then you'll start to be able to get through 15 minutes because the silence won't be as scary, because you won't have this hammering on the back of your head like you need to be doing this. That to-do list won't be just running up and down your mind. You'll be able just to be in the moment. And if you can learn how to be in the moment with yourself, you'll be able to be in the moment with the people that you love and the people that you want to love in the future, right? You won't always need to get away. And so those three things will help you start to change your life and your relationships today. So if you missed that, I want you to re-listen and write it down and put it on your wall so that you don't remember. But you have to actively do these things. These things are not going to happen passively. If you're like, I'll just remember to do this later and kind of half-ass it and pick around, you're going to continue to struggle with love avoidance. So I want you to be intentional and get started. If you would like more support with this, Learn to Thrive is here for you. That is our program where we help women with intimacy disorders, love addiction, love avoidance, love anorexia, get to the other side. And so and get the life and relationships that they want. So if you are not already on the wait list for that, you can go to learntothrivecourse.com and sign up. And or you can sign up for the Money Rehab course if you are interested in that and you may have forgot because of all the good information you got this episode. You can do that by going to blackgirlsheal.org/moneyrehab. And of course, those links will be in the show notes. I want to thank you for listening to this episode. It is a longer one. It's filled with so much good stuff, and I hope that you are able to apply it. I want you to let me know what you think by sharing a screenshot on IG and tell me what was your favorite point. You can also join us in our Facebook group, our Black Girls Heal Facebook group, by going to blackgirlsheal.org/group. And you can always subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so that other women can find this podcast and get supported in their healing journeys as well. So that's it for this episode. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you in the next one.